Welcome to the Abundant Wellness Podcast. I'm Andrea, registered nurse, functional health practitioner, author, and mom navigating the very real trenches of parenting kids with sensitive, complex nervous systems. This podcast is for parents who are tired of being told to just try harder, who feel the grief of realizing you can't fix your child, but still refuse to believe that this is the end of your story. Here, we talk about what actually helps: nervous system-informed parenting, functional health, the gut-brain connection, emotional resilience, and faith in the middle of the mess. See, you're raising a child who's not broken, but deeply wired. My hope is that every episode helps you to feel less alone, more anchored, and better equipped to support both yourself and your child. If you're ready for compassionate science, honest conversations, and hope that doesn't bypass reality, you're in the right place. Let's get started. All right. Thanks, listeners, for being on today. We have another amazing guest for the Abundant Wellness Podcast, and that is Mark Talaga, who is Did I say it right?
Oh, you nailed it.
Okay, perfect. Who is the host of the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. And he's here to talk to us about all things being gifted. What does that actually mean? I know that there are so many listeners that not only have children that are neurodivergent, maybe they have a diagnosis of some kind, but as a functional health practitioner, as a nurse, this is actually an area that I see being very overlooked with some of our neurodivergent children, is actually misdiagnosing them. And so, Mark, I would love for you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about how you got to what you're doing today, and we'll just kind of dive right into the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my road to where I'm at today is kind of windy, but
as is all of ours, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I am the owner and director of the Center for Identity Potential. We're located in the Metro Detroit area with an office in Chicago as well. And we specialize in working with the gifted, gifted and talented. Just as an aside, I don't particularly care for the word gifted. It's not a perfect word. There's some stigma associated with it, and I have a definition that we use here to describe what we mean by that. But it's what we got, and it's relatively useful when we're talking about certain kind of kids that just kind of clicks and makes sense for most people.
Yeah.
I got my start originally in video games. That was my original path in life. Cool. Where as a gifted kid growing up, I was like, well, I'll just do something I'm interested in. I'll do something that I love and that takes a lot of my energy and time, and that will solve all my problems. But lo and behold, after about 4 years in the industry, I was fired because my executive function was terrible and I couldn't stay on top of things. And while I was very interested and very good at video games, that doesn't always translate to real life skills that are necessary when, running a business. And so I was left to my own devices of what do I want to do here? And it was more about this awakening of what if I helped others? What if it wasn't so much about me as what I could do for other people? And so that led me towards counseling, where I got my master's. And then I came across Andy Mahoney, who was the founder of the center where I work now. And he created the idea of counseling specifically to gifted. How does their intelligence, how does their development, how does the extreme nature play a role in counseling and the symptoms and behaviors that we're trying to help alleviate and help families navigate? And that's, what I've been doing for the last 12 years about.
That's amazing. And to me, it actually makes perfect sense that you would have started with gaming, because and obviously, I haven't looked at your brain. I don't know what kind of amazing skills that you have, but I do think that that's a common trait among the highly intelligent. So I want to go back to what you said about not liking the term gifted. Tell me how you would describe that. Like, what is it actually then? If we're wanting to pull away from the stigma that's behind that word and what gets so easily missed when we use it, what is the term or the phrasing that you would use to describe what this looks like in children and adults too? Because that applies.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't just disappear as you get older.
Right.
We always tell parents that.
Yeah.
It doesn't go anywhere. So, the term that I find is the best is just asynchronous development is really what we're dealing with when we're dealing with giftedness. it's not a terrible word, giftedness, but it comes with this idea that, oh, you're going to be fine. You're going to go to MIT and Harvard. You're going to save the world. There's no problems. Yeah. You're doing okay. And there's just so many parents and families that I deal with that have not had that experience at all. And so it's hard for them to feel as understood as they'd like when they try to tell other parents or schools that, hey, my kid is gifted, and people maybe even roll their eyes a little bit, or, okay, isn't every kid gifted? And it can get a little challenging. But what we're really dealing with when we're talking about giftedness is some area of development, of just human development that we all have in an extreme. And that could be, yes, a high level of, verbal precocity where they know an enormous amount of, language and wording. It could be artistic development, that is, their fine motor skill is well beyond something of other kids their age. It could be their sense of moral justice. It could be their physique and their physical ability. Any of that is way outside of the norm. Standard deviations apart from the normative is, to me, giftedness.
Okay.
But what we find is when you have kids that are out on some level of an extreme, is that other areas of their development aren't always at an equal level. Some of it's more in the normative range or even delayed, and it creates these gaps in a person's profile, in their developmental profile. And so that asynchrony is the issue that comes into our office a lot. It's these gaps that go untested for or misdiagnosed or misunderstood that need to really be at the forefront of understanding why that kid struggles with something that may seem simple, but for them is highly complicated.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really good way to phrase it. And it's actually what caught my attention. And it was either a reel or a podcast you did, I can't remember exactly, was that asynchronous learning where, and I'll have you go into a little bit more detail about that, because I think there is an assumption that if somebody is highly intelligent, that also means that they can cope with life stressors to that same degree. Correct. That they don't have sensory overwhelm, that they don't have emotional overwhelm, that they just have this enormous capacity that matches their giftedness or their intelligence, right? And so tell us a little bit about, what do you see? Where is the lag? Where is the mismatch? Because I think that's what I'm hearing you say, is that there's almost this mismatch in the level of intelligence, or maybe IQ. I'm just kind of using words that other people would understand when they're listening to this, that doesn't match their executive function. Right. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, it's a very common thing where the child might come in and school has been a breeze for them. They've had a natural intelligence that they can intuit answers and understand things logically. They get the game of school, but at some point they'll hit a ceiling, a limit, and it's different for every kid. But usually we see it in like third grade, eighth grade, freshman year, junior year, or college, these big developmental leap areas. And what we find is that's when we start to see that the vulnerabilities, the areas that are underdeveloped, become the most prominent. And every kid is different. But the most common is usually a child with high level of knowledge and awareness of things, but low ability to process information effectively. Okay. Meaning it changes based on the content, right? So if it's an area of high interest, or they have a high level of expertise, their processing works great, or even an accelerated pace. But if it's something where they struggle with processing language auditorily around a subject that may be not very interesting or relevant to them, all of a sudden they're taking in 0% information, Right. And they're struggling, and they will say they are bored. And so sometimes we'll say, well, they're gifted, so their boredom must be related to they're under-challenged, when in certain cases that's not it at all. Or their executive functioning is so poor that their ability to remember something or advocate for themselves or be consistent with certain kind of behaviors or doing homework on a regular basis is like pulling teeth. It is a very difficult thing for that kid. But because they're so smart, people are like, oh, they're just being lazy. They just need to work harder. They just need more reminders. We need to punish them a little bit or something. And it does not work. It is not effective. And it's more not that they won't, it's that they can't. But that's such a hard thing to wrap your head around when they're as smart as they are.
parenting a child with ADHD, autism, PDA, anxiety, or ODD, and you are exhausted trying to figure out what's actually going on, I want you to hear this. Many of the kids I work with also struggle with symptoms like constipation, diarrhea, bloating, skin issues, or brain fog. And while it can feel like the behavioral and digestive pieces are separate, they're not. They are deeply connected. And that's why the Happy Tummies, Happy Kids program helps to resolve this problem. It is a 4-month root cause approach program that looks at your child's whole system through a functional lens, not to change who they are, but to improve their function and reduce suffering regardless of the diagnosis. If you're wondering whether this kind of support is right for your child, the next step is to book a Strong Start discovery call. It's a conversation with me to understand your child's unique needs and see if this program is a good fit for them. You can schedule a Strong Start discovery call using the link in the show notes. You don't have to figure this out alone, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Absolutely. And I would say I've met several children exactly like this in my career, where it's like you're looking at them and they are smart as a whip. And you're like, I could tell this kid is above average intelligence for their age. And yet you experience that mismatch when maybe you're trying to engage with them emotionally, or right. You're asking them to do something that requires flexibility that now their nervous system can't access that skill anymore. Right. So are there common overlapping diagnoses? I know giftedness isn't a diagnosis, really. I don't think. I mean, it's a label, I guess, that we use. But
you can technically qualify as gifted according to certain tests. But yeah, I'm with you. It's not really a diagnosis.
It's not really. Yeah. Which, I mean, why, it's kind of like, why would it be other than to help provide services, maybe? But are there overlapping diagnoses that you do see with these children, like maybe oppositional defiance disorder or autism, or what would that look like?
I mean, you name it, it's there, right? ADHD and yes, the spectrum disorders. But the idea is it's so hard to tease out what's what, because, a child with oppositional defiant disorder, it's not my favorite diagnosis. I'll tell you that right off the bat.
Oh, 100% agree.
Yeah, right. You know what I mean?
Hate
like
it.
It's a cluster of symptoms. And
right.
Sometimes there's some characterological stuff that maybe needs to be addressed or that's useful for, but not always. But you have a child, like, let's say, who, yes, has horrific auditory processing, meaning they hear something you said and they have learned to nod and smile or fill in the blank with what they think you're saying. And they've kind of learned to get along without really ever hearing people. And that child now seems like they're a liar, right? Go clean your room. Yeah, okay. You hear what I'm saying? Yeah, I hear you. You come back 20 minutes later. I told you to clean your room. No, you didn't. You never said that. Now, for some people, that's like, you got to be kidding me. I just told you. But there is truth in that for some kids, they literally did not process what you said. It was not in there, especially during moments of transition, right? When they're getting in the car or exiting to go to do something.
Yes.
There's a level of anxiety. There's a lot of stuff that gets in the way where it seems that they're being oppositional or defiant, but it could be just they're challenging in what they feel is a very appropriate way. And they really need certain things from you, but it's coming across as, you're just not being compliant right now. It's such a careful thing that you have to assess for. And even attentional issues, right? They can't sit still in class. Well, that could be ADHD, that could be attentional in nature, or it could be they have, primitive reflexes that haven't been integrated into their body yet.
So glad you said that.
Yeah,
yes.
Right? And so they're actual sitting still is wildly uncomfortable. And if they don't move, it's painful. And it's something
and dysregulating.
And dysregulating, right? And they're trying to regulate themselves through the movement.
Right.
Yes. So it's such a tricky thing. And so, there's this term in the world of gifted called 2E, twice exceptional, where you are gifted and you have some sort of learning or, disability.
Yes.
I don't like that term either. I'm going against the grain here a lot, but it's more like 10E. There's so many little things that you have to be aware of and assess for that can impact a child's learning and ability to regulate and an ability to follow through on certain things. And it can be very challenging and stressful, and parents can get overloaded and schools can get overloaded and that child is overloaded. And so really, really good assessment should tease out each little tiny, minute detail of where that child's struggle is. And that's what you're really looking for. Let's try to get a sense of everything so it all makes sense in context with why the child's behaviors might seemingly be, a problem.
Absolutely. And man, there's so much about that I loved that you shared about reflexes. I learned so much when my daughter was diagnosed with pandas. She went from neurotypical to not overnight. And primitive reflex integration was one of the things that helped her the most. Now, genetically, she has a very high level of intelligence, like her dad. She got most of that from her dad. I have a decent IQ, but I wouldn't say that I'm gifted necessarily. Do you see within families that there are traits that are genetically passed? That might be a dumb question, but I feel like so many parents are sitting across from their kids thinking, where did this come from?
Right.
And it's like a mirror being held up to us, right? And so can you tell us a little bit about what you observe with that?
There's 100% a genetic component. I always joke with the parents, I'm like, well, they didn't get it from the milkman. You know what I mean? Like it comes from somewhere.
Unless there was a milkman.
Yeah, well, right? Right. The one time I say that, somebody's like,
yeah. How did you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's a lot of things that go into it. And, I have kids that have gone, that are adopted as well, that the parents are like, we don't know where this all comes from. And it can be tricky because there is a genetic factor.
Right. Yeah.
And the reality is, yes, the more you start working with the gifted children, the more the parents, as long as they're involved in the process, which ours always are when working at our center, start to realize that they're not as different as they think. There are things that were treated differently when they were younger, or the way that their parents may have dealt with certain situations or provided certain things, or the way the education system existed back then, where the behaviors may not have materialized in the same way. But the more you start to understand these things in terms of development and vulnerability and lagging development, the more parents are like, oh yeah, I always kind of had to figure out this way to deal with that issue. I was never allowed to just decompensate and, lose my mind over the noise that kept happening. This is how I dealt with it. But there is this sense of understanding all of a sudden, when it's not, oh, my child's an alien. It's more like, oh, developmentally speaking, that would be a typical response for a child who can't handle, that level of stimuli or whatever it is for that kid.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you touched on that, because I do feel like there's been a massive shift in the last 10 to 20 years in terms of understanding neurodevelopment in children, and many of us parents recognizing all of the ways that we've been overcompensated, and it's just kind of been magnified in our kids, right? So it's this magnification is what it looks like in terms of what we're seeing, whether that be diagnoses or difficulties or dysregulated nervous systems. At the end of the day, would you say, I'm trying to figure out how to language this question, so just bear with me while I fumble through it. Would you say that the mismatch that you see, so we've got this high level of intelligence, this giftedness, and I know we're trying to move away from that word, but I don't really know how else to simplify it.
You could still use it. I mean, my podcast is hopelessly gifted, so I clearly own it a little bit.
Use it sometimes. Yeah. Right. So within that, there's also how I would interpret it, these nervous system states, right, that get stuck, or, and maybe it's labeled as oppositional defiance or emotional dysregulation. Is that what would you say that you see that a fair amount as well, that there's this giftedness, but it also, their ability to handle that and handle life is based on the nervous system's ability to move? I don't know if I'm not quite nailing the question, but
right.
Okay.
Because you're saying, basically they have these vulnerabilities, associated with their neurophysiology, right? The ability to regulate themselves through typical situations is hampered, especially at younger ages, and it can get better over time. But what we've found is really over the lifespan of a gifted person, that area of vulnerability, of being able to tolerate things or being able to express or integrate emotional experiences, which may feel like the kids are inflexible around it, or they shut it down, or they have no sense of it, can literally become their greatest strength later on in life. Mm-hmm. And but as long as you look at it developmentally speaking. And so we never shortchange a kid in their ability to do anything, right? There's a lot of parents that'll be like, well, my kid's social life is terrible. They can't make friends. They don't know how to talk to kids. They're off info dumping on these friends who have no desire to have that happen to them. And so, I just want them to hang out with kids that are just like them. And maybe at the time that's perfectly fine, but that kid can absolutely learn the skills of tracking another person and whether they're following or not, processing more effectively what another person is saying, and then reflecting back what they're hearing. Those skills can be taught to any kid. And, I have parents that are be like, oh, they don't use Asperger's anymore, but they're too Asperger-y to have friends. And I will put them in a group and we will work on these pragmatic language skills. And that kid will start to learn how to express their deep sense of feeling and fear and pain and joy and hope. And they'll do it in a much more regulated way. They had to be taught that way, but it can come out of them. And they can do it to an extreme degree. Right. And so we're always looking at, yes, they are coming in with vulnerabilities that need to be protected, but they can be developed. And that is the real hope that comes at the end of the day of what helps these kids move through life. Absolutely.
Well, and I would say with that, there seems to be, when there is this high capacity for intelligence with these kids, there's also a high capacity for learning. And we're not just talking about academic learning. And I think that's the thing that I want parents to hear, is that same ability to learn, let's say they're really good at math, right? And they're super gifted at math, and that comes really easy to them. That tells me that their brain and their nervous system does actually have a high capacity for learning other skills as well. It's just a matter of how do we do that? What is the therapy or the support or the skill building that we need to now put in place so that they can acquire this thing that does not come naturally to them? Because the reality is all of us have things that don't come naturally to us, right? Confrontation does not come naturally to me. My husband, zero problems with that. Not a problem. He can tackle it head on, but can I learn it? Yes. Yes, I can.
Well, let me ask you this, Andrea. Does it bother you on any level that you're not as good at dealing with confrontation as you'd like?
Yes.
Okay. That tells me right there that you have the potential to be masterful at dealing with confrontation.
Okay.
It's a matter of getting in touch with, first and foremost, does anybody feel that there's something inside them that tells them, I wish I was better at this. I wish I could deal with this. I wish I had this. And that is an innate recognition that the ability is there. But the way it works for you and how you specifically might want to handle confrontation, the Andrea Jones way of dealing with it, may not be anything that was ever taught to you, modeled for you, shown to you, developed through you. And that's where a lot of the challenge comes in, because we shut down on this idea of, I just can't really do this. And kids do this all the time, but adults do this all the time. And we always want to be careful of that, let us first recognize that if at some level something bothers you, you have the potential to do it. And then there's a matter of, do you want to engage in that process? Do you want to develop that skill? Are you aware of what it might take? Knowing that it might look very different for you than it would be for anybody else, learning those same skills.
Absolutely. I feel like applies to so many different areas of life, not just this one topic, of childhood development. And I think it really applies to any of us that need to learn anything. So I love that you phrased it that way. I think it's fantastic. You mentioned, it sounds like, some skills coaching. I know that you didn't use that specific word, but that's kind of what it sounded like. What other therapies do you find the most beneficial for? And I know that there's, we're using a big umbrella here to cover a lot of different things. What type of adjunct therapies do you find beneficial for children who are highly intelligent but are struggling in these other areas, whether that's socially, emotionally, physically?
So it all comes down to the most therapeutic thing you can do for a child that is extraordinarily complex and typical normative routes of support don't work for them. Meaning, look, we took them to therapy. We took them here. We tried to work with the school. We tried to get a 504. Nothing seems to be working. The most therapeutic thing you could do at that point is really, really good comprehensive testing. Meaning you are learning at a very deep level what that child is dealing with and what they're up against. Now, I'm a big believer in don't tell your kids the scores that they get in their testing, because they won't have a context for that. They'll take it out of context and they'll be like, oh, I see how dumb I am here, or see how smart I am here. And so you got to be careful with that. But the idea is, when you have a sense of, oh, that's why this is going on, that can be the most therapeutic thing you ever do for a child or for a family. It's not as simple as that always. But yes, there are certain things where OT can be extraordinarily beneficial. Or yes, finding out if there's underlying autoimmune or medical issues that have been exacerbating stuff all along that the child has just been dealing with can be helpful, right? You want to know as much as you can. The actual therapy itself then comes in when you recognize what the vulnerability is, where the real struggle is. Then you can target, how do we want to support them? And for sometimes it's not as crazy as it might seem. The school might just have to do a really good job of creating much more executive function support than they ever realized was necessary. And all of a sudden that child's development is now able to get a breathing room and be able to catch up, right?
Right.
And so it really varies, obviously, depending on the child, but it's without that understanding of what you're really working towards and what's going to really help. It's a very tricky thing of, well, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this. And our work is how we integrate really good testing into the therapy to say, here's what we know for sure. It's not all psychological in nature. There are just certain things that you are struggling with that there's a reason why it's as hard as it has been for you.
One of the biggest and most easily fixed issues that I see in parents raising neurodivergent children or parents of children with a complex medical diagnosis is actually mineral deficiencies and low electrolytes. When we are under chronic stress, as raising these children is chronically stressful, we run through our electrolytes and our minerals very, very quickly, which then puts a lot of stress on pretty much every organ system in the body. So one of the things that I teach a lot of the parents that I work with is a very quick action step, which is to just grab a scoop of electrolytes and add it to your water 1 to 2 times a day. It's one of the easiest ways that you can nourish your body so that you don't end up in a state of depletion. When we are mineral balanced, when our electrolytes are balanced, we sleep better, we respond to stress better, we bounce back a lot quicker from events that are really stressful. So one of the electrolytes that I use is Paleo Valley. They're super duper clean, no food coloring, no yucky ingredients, super affordable. I have a 15% off link for you in the show notes. One thing that you can do to care for yourself today is to grab some electrolytes, add it to your water, and remind yourself that you're worth nourishing too. Absolutely. And I will say, just as speaking as the parent now, not the podcast host, that was one of the most beneficial things we ever did was we got a neuropsych evaluation. I know that's not the only test, but it was for us at the time, one of the only avenues to determining the impact of how pandas had impacted her executive function and what were we dealing with? Were we also dealing with autism? Were we dealing with sensory processing? What are we dealing with here? And one of my biggest takeaways from that was actually how she processed information. It's going to make everybody cringe, but hopefully it will also make you feel better as a parent to know that we're all learning together. Yeah. I used to think that she was only listening if she was making eye contact with me when I would say, hey, Lex, I need you to X, Y, and Z. And she would not be looking at me, but she would hear me and go on the way. But, for us born and raised in the 80s, it was a sign of respect to look at the adult and nod at them. You know what I mean? That was more deeply ingrained in me than I realized until I had to parent a kid differently. Well, what we learned through the testing was that she was primarily an auditory learner and an auditory processor. And so she was hearing everything, processing everything that I said and responding appropriately. But the eye contact piece, she didn't need that in order to do what she needed to do. And it completely changed how I showed up in those parenting dynamics where I was frustrated with her. And so testing absolutely is a huge piece of that because we have to know where the gaps are in order to fix them. I'm assuming that finding a good practitioner, a good clinician is going to help guide families in knowing what kind of testing to do. But if you just had to kind of spitball for us what some of those assessments might be,
Right. And here's
what
where I'm
would
going
those
to
be?
disappoint a lot of people.
That's okay.
I firmly believe that you should only do it through the care of a clinician who
I
has
agree.
assessed and recommended, hey, this is appropriate for this child.
Absolutely.
Testing every single child is not always appropriate.
Right.
You have to know where that kid is, how much they can handle, what they're really looking for, you know, where the challenges really are. And so there's always a caveat, right? It sounds like, oh, if I get testing, then everything's fine. No. Yeah, it's kind of like.
That's step one of 1,000. Maybe.
Yeah, right. And having a clinician, having somebody that is guiding you through that process. So you are doing it, you know, with a team, and finding your team is really probably the most important thing you could do. Finding people that understand what you're going through, that have seen what you're going through, that have knowledge and are not afraid or grasping at straws or projecting what they think you're dealing with, but have the knowledge base to back it up. That is more important. And that is harder. It can feel harder. Like I've gone through therapists, or I'm bound by insurance and nobody really works with gifted. But I promise you, you continue to look for, you know, your state's gifted association and who they might know, or the NAGC, the National Association of Gifted Children. But you continue to look for people that will really understand your family dynamics, your child, and what you might need. You're on the right track. You're heading in the right direction. And it's just a matter of staying in that process, because you will find your own vulnerabilities of how hard it is to stay on top of these things and organized, and to continue to advocate when it feels like everybody's telling you you're overreacting or whatever it is. It can be very painful and lonely, which is why I named the podcast the Hopelessly Gifted Podcast, because there is that sense of, am I ever going to figure this out?
Absolutely.
But, you know, with people like you, Andrea, in the world, you know, helping parents and understanding complexity, and that it's not so easy. And there was absolutely nothing cringe about what you said. That was the most human experience you had with your child that can be related to, you know?
Well, yeah, thank you. But I cringe because I think it's that I wish that I had known sooner, because then we wouldn't have had such negative interactions with each other. Right. And I think that's every parent's desire, is we want to interact with our kids in a way that's meaningful, and we recognize when we're not. And you hit the nail on the head when, as a parent, I firmly believe this. I have been working with parents for over 20 years in peds ICU, NICU. I mean, every kind of setting you can think of. Never are they wrong. They're never wrong.
Yep.
I can think of one case, and that mom was pathological and is now in prison. Like the extreme. Mm-hmm. Does not happen on a daily. So for those of you that are listening, if you're like, I don't know if I can trust myself because people keep telling me that I'm wrong, you're not wrong. Statistically, you're not wrong. So that being said, it can feel like you're up against this mountain of trying to figure out, how am I going to get my kid better? And how am I going to get people to listen to me so that I can get my kid better? Right. And that's what we're here for, you know, different realms, different facets of care, but still the same mission, I would say, which is to get kids the help and the support that they need. So on that note, what do gifted children need from their parents that's different from traditional parenting advice? I feel like this could be a whole book. Probably.
Yeah, honestly. There's a lot in this. Okay.
Do you have a book on this that we can refer?
I'm writing one now. I don't want to, spoil too much, but it is in the process.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a lot about how to work as a family and the systems that are connected with all of this. But the idea is, you first have to understand that for a gifted child, the simple is complex and the complex is simple. Okay. So you have to have these two competing truths exist at the same time. They are able to do incredible things at a high level that shock you. And it's almost like seductive of like, my kid can do anything. They're going to save the world. But at the same time, they need so much more support. And there is a reality that gifted education is special education. Mm-hmm. You could even go as far to say that your child is a special needs child at that point. And that is not I have zero negativity or, pejorative context to that term. I think that is just what it is. There are special specific needs that have to be integrated. And so there is no parenting handbook really. But there's at the same time, when you understand that whatever those challenges you're having at home can be rooted in the development of that child, or lack of development or underdevelopment at some point, things should start to make a little bit more sense, right? If your kid is, throwing his plate against the wall because the food you served was incorrect, that feels like, oh my gosh, this is way beyond the norm. This is crazy. We need to get a food specialist in here right away. Maybe, right? Sure. I'm not saying don't go down that road.
Maybe. Right.
But the other idea is your child's trying to do something in that moment, trying to stay regulated, but for some reason can't. They're becoming inflexible. They're becoming rigid. And that rigidity and inflexibility is more a sign that they are trying to solve a problem in a way that is taking too much control in the situation because they're not dealing with where they don't have any control. And it could be just a matter of expressing what the challenge is. And it is something where you have to strike when the iron is cold and figure out with them when they're not in a state of,
rage.
Right. Because their brain isn't going to work anyways. Their prefrontal cortex is gone in those moments. So you just don't. And so, yes, there's a lot of things, but if you can always remind yourself of taking a step back and saying, we're missing something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't all make sense yet, but it will make sense. It is not hopeless, and it is not this place where we're never going to get things to be better. It's just you're still missing something. That is probably the best place you can be.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think the only caveat or the only thing that I would add to that is that it's so hard to internalize as the parent in that moment that you are actually the one that's a huge part of that, of solving the puzzle. Like, I can trust myself to be a good observer. I can trust myself to take really good notes so that the next time I go to my counselor or my therapist or whoever I'm working with for my child, we're going to figure this out together. And I think parents have this unique grit to us in the parenting neurodivergent children, parenting, intelligent children realm, that we do just have a certain level of grit that other parents do not have. And I can say this because I was raising a neurotypical child until I wasn't. And my level of grit then is different than it is now. And so you can lean into that. I think that's what I want the parents to hear is you can lean into that unique ability that only you have to observe and articulate what you're seeing happen with your child. Like, my kid only has meltdowns in these kind of situations, and this is what it looks like. Can we try to figure out together how to help that, and problem solve what the issue actually is?
I want to add on to that because I think this is maybe the most important thing for a parent to hear. You're 100% right. It's this idea of you are allowed to say to a professional, I don't know what is going on, but I know something's going on. I know it's something. And as a parent, you shouldn't move forward until some bell of truth within you rings solid, right? Like, oh, absolutely, that makes sense. Actually, that tracks. That is fitting with my at-home context and experience. And if it doesn't, if you're like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I'm still struggling to understand why this bit doesn't make sense. It is okay to push back and say, and hopefully the clinician or whoever you're working with is not, trying to override you. And if they are, maybe you run for the hills. But you have to have that collaborative sense of, I definitely know I don't know something, but when I hear it, I will know that makes sense. And that will track for me. And that I agree with 100%.
Yeah. And I like the way that you articulated that, because kind of flipping the coin a little bit, I distinctly remember that feeling of, I don't know what's wrong, but I know something's wrong. Took my daughter to the doctor. I had, I'd seen maybe one patient in 20 years that had pandas, and it was in the back of my mind that would fit. But, you're kind of hoping you're wrong. And went to the doctor, and he said almost exactly what you said, like, this is what we're dealing with. And so I knew, like, immediately, this is what we're dealing with. And it was that kind of bell of truth, like you said, like, oh, this is the problem, right? It's not that my child has just decided to misbehave and decided to rage for 5 hours. Like, who chooses that? Who chooses that? Nobody.
Nobody.
No. And I think that's the other big misconception. And we could get on, a rabbit trail here. But the other misconception is that these kids aren't doing the best that they can. And I firmly disbelieve that.
Yep. Every kid wants to do well. Every kid, every child wants to make sense of things and do well by others and is struggling to figure that out.
And do well by for themselves.
Yes, 100%.
Who wants to feel miserable? Like, I'm sorry, I will never be able to get behind that. I have heard there are still parent coaches out there that are touting the opposite. And I'm like, that is a hill I will die on, because I don't believe that. No. I've seen way too many kids. And I distinctly remember too, like after my daughter would come out of this rage, and granted hers was a medical issue, she would say, I'm really sorry. I don't know. Like there was this level of distress of not knowing what was happening to her or why, she was behaving a certain way. She hated it, every second of it. And so, so I know that that's a little bit of a bunny trail there that we went off of, but it's an important one. And I think parents also need to hear that, because when we're dealing with behaviors that are really distressing, and they can be very, very distressing as a parent to deal with, I think that was the mantra that I just kept telling myself over and over and over again. She is doing the best that she can. She can learn to do better with the right support. And so if that is my core value, then it's a matter of providing the right support. And that might mean me and 15 other people. I don't know. Like, I don't know what it's going to take, but I know that she can get there, and she's doing wonderful now, and not that we don't have struggles. She's 15. So it's that continuous improvement over time. It's that feeling that you're on a process and a pathway to feeling like, we're not in the, so lost in the woods anymore. And it is such an important piece, and you're allowed to reevaluate as you go. That Absolutely.
thing that rings true at one point, and then as they get older, now things are shifting a little bit. There's new information, there's new evidence.
Yeah.
You're allowed to reevaluate and say, okay, has something shifted? Has this diagnosis that felt so right on for so long now doesn't fit as much, and that's okay too, right?
Absolutely.
It can all make sense. It can all be integrated into your reality of what's happening.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually a really healthy and smart way to look at it, because none of us have stagnant development. Like there's so many, huge pivotal developmental leaps, hormonal leaps, physical leaps. There's no way for neurology not to be impacted by that. There just isn't. So there's not
even a little.
Not even a little bit. Do you, and I apologize that I don't know this, it may be on your website, but just for those that are like resonating with this message and like, oh my gosh, I need to figure out how to get help and how to get in contact with you. Do you work virtually? Do you have services that are an option for those that maybe don't live locally to you? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. And we do work virtually. So because we are not paneled with any insurance companies, we are able to work it kind of outside of that world. Awesome. And can meet over teletherapy and things like that. And, we assess very deeply when people come to us, are we a good fit for them, and are they a good fit for us? Because we want to make sure that is a match where it's an equal exchange of energy right away. But even if you're not, or there's something where, wow, you need a lot more support, or there's other things that you need to be focusing on first, our job is to try to guide you towards where you should be heading next. And for sometimes it's, parents will say, my 3.5-year-old is gifted and I want them in therapy. And I'll say, well, developmentally speaking, that might not be as effective, but we do a lot of parent support and parent work. I'm putting together a parent group now for a lot of the people that are in our practice for parents of adult gifted children who are still struggling.
That's amazing.
And and it's a very important area where a lot of people have a lot of shame and I don't know what to do when my kid should be doing this and they're not. And I'm just trying to disabuse them of all that, unneeded feelings of shame when there's much more clear things that could be understood and done. So yes, long story short, there's plenty of resources and things available to those that might find this helpful or even interesting.
Absolutely. Well, I have loved this conversation. I feel like we could talk more and more and more. I'm grateful that I found you, because I know that I've learned something today. I learned many things today, but I also know that our listeners just desperately need people in their corner. And, I'm a piece of that puzzle. Maybe, the more people we can get in on the mission to help kids feel better and parents thrive in their parenting journey of, children that are just challenging in different ways, right? I think is a huge piece of it. So do you have any last parting words for our audience today? And if you wouldn't mind sharing where they can find you, that will be in the show notes, but just so they can kind of hear it and make a mental tag of it.
Oh gosh, yeah. What do I want to share today? I usually end on the complex is simple and simple is complex, but we already burned through that one. So I don't know. What's my other favorite one? The old Chinese proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Right now.
Today.
So today it's one of those things where, it's okay to start looking and going down this process today and to not feel like you waited too long or things are or I wish I would have had this information before. There's always things you could be dealing with and growing at. And, nobody does anything great alone. If you're interested in finding more about our services, you can go to centerforidentitypotential.com and you'll find a lot of things there. Or if you're interested in following more of my podcast journey, the Hopelessly Gifted podcast, you can go to hopelesslygifted.com or look up Hopelessly Gifted Podcasts on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and find us there.
Amazing. Well, I am thrilled for all of this, but I'm also super excited for your book. And for those of you that are listening, make sure, please, to give him a follow so that you can be in the know when that's released, whenever it is, because we know that having a book is like birthing a baby. It is there's a full process there. So congratulations in advance for that. I know that's a huge deal. And I just want to say thank you again so much, Mark, for your time today and sharing all of your information and knowledge with all of our listeners.
Thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure.